Hello, Vikings. Welcome back. We're looking at Unit 4 right now, which is the financial sector. It's the money unit. We explore what are financial assets. We look at the definition of money, banking, and the expansion of the money supply, the money market, and then also monetary policy. So we'll look at the difference between stocks and bonds, also the money market, and then fractional reserve banking, which is the way that banks create money through basically making loans in the fractional reserve banking system. So the financial sector, first we're going to explore what are financial assets. Basically anything of economic value, could be tangible or intangible. And most liquid forms of money are either cash or demand deposits. So when we say something is liquid, we're saying it's either cash or it's like in a checking account, basically a demand deposit. That's considered the most liquid financial asset. My house is an asset for sure, but it's not very liquid because it's going to take me a long time to sell my house. I might think my house has more value than another versus if I have a $10 bill, almost everyone is going to value that at $10, basically. Bonds are an interest-bearing asset, basically. So a bond is like a loan. And so the government sells bonds so that they can get money. But you could buy bonds. If you have extra money that you don't need to use right now or the near future, you can buy a bond, and that's basically going to then earn you interest over time, over the life of your bond. The longer you're willing to separate from your money, usually the more money you will earn on that bond. Stocks are different though. Stocks is equity or ownership. When you own a bond, that's just a loan that you're giving to a country or a company. But a stock is when you have ownership or equity in the company, basically. When you buy a share of stock, you're buying a piece of that company, a small fraction of that company, basically. Opportunity cost of holding money is the interest that you could have earned owning an asset. So if you hold on to your money, there's some people that don't like to buy bonds and stocks because they're fearful, but just they should know that there is the opportunity cost. What are they giving up? They could be earning money off their bond or money off the stocks if they grow up in value versus not just keeping it in a mattress where obviously you're not going to earn any kind of money. So the first topic in this is then the nominal versus real interest rates. Remember, nominal means not adjusted for inflation. Real means that it has been adjusted. So they're going to expect you to know how to calculate real and nominal interest rates. This is a very simple thing. In life, it's not so simple, but for macroeconomics, it is very simple. Basically, they're going to give you one of the three. It's the same type of thing, they'll give you two of the three. And they then expect you to find the other one. So they might give you the inflation rate and the real interest rate, and they want to know what's the nominal. You would just add those. So the formula is a lot of times too, they'll give us the nominal and they give us the inflation rate. And we want to know what's the real interest rate. Just know that the real interest rate is when we account for inflation. So it's the nominal rate minus whatever the anticipated rate of inflation is. If you're a lender and you think that the inflation is going to be 6%, and you want to make 5% on your loan, that's the real return you want to get, then you need to charge a total rate of 11%. Money. All right, so money is an asset, any asset that can be accepted as payment. We have three functions of money. Money needs to be used as a medium of exchange, meaning that for it to be good money, I have to be able to go to a gas station or go to a store or go to a business owner and say, here's my money, will you give me goods and services in exchange for this? So I should be able to use it as a form of payments. I should also be able to use it as a unit of account. I should be able to count my money. I also should be able to store my money for later use and basically use it in the future, basically. M1 is basically currency and checkable deposits. So M1 is the broadest definition of money. It includes just currency and checkable deposits. M2 includes M1, but it also includes what we call near monies. These would be things like savings deposits or time deposits, things that can convert into cash, but not as easily and with as such certainty as a demand deposit or actual physical cash. The monetary base includes currency in circulation and then also bank reserves. So banking and expansion of the money supply. This is basically just the idea of how do banks create money. And they don't physically create it. Don't get the idea that they are like printing money in the back of their bank or anything like that. That's not allowed. Only the US government is allowed to print money. Or if you remember government, only the Congress is allowed to coin money, basically. So in that case, how do banks then create money? They do it through the loan system, through the fractional reserve banking system, basically. So bank balance sheets show off assets and liabilities. The fractional reserve banking system basically is that system where you only have to hold a fraction of your reserves. Remember that the banks don't have to hold on to all of the money that you deposit in the bank. They only have to hold on to a fraction. Now, if you go and ask the bank for your money back, you can go get 100% of it. So don't think that the bank is just wasting your money. They're taking your money and they're making loans with it so they can make a profit. And then at any time you want to access your demand deposit, you will be able to, basically. So don't worry about that. But most of us don't need to access 100% of our demand deposits all the time. And that's why it's good for a bank to be able to access those so they can loan money. It's good for our economic system as well. Required reserves are the amount that the banks must hold on to, so they're required to hold on to by the federal government. Excess reserves are basically the amount that banks can lend out. So the extra, they're allowed to loan out. The required, they have to keep. The excess, they are allowed to loan out. The money multiplier is 1 divided by the reserve requirement ratio. And then also they have a little section in your curriculum there where they say that the amount of the money multiplier actually may be overstated. And there's 2 reasons why that might be. So if you get asked that question about why might the money multiplier not be accurate or why might it be overstated, and you just want to say either because or both, because banks might hold on to more money or the public could hold on to more money too. So when we do the money multiplier, we assume that all that money is then lent and then spent and then lent and then spent and all that kind of stuff for it. But that might not necessarily happen. I could actually accept new income and just hold on to it, or a bank, like for example, during the 2008 financial crisis, banks were very fearful to loan out money. So even though the government was giving them money to loan out, which was meant to then have the effect of helping the economy, unfortunately, a lot of banks were fearful, didn't know the assets that they had. So that was a reason why it didn't have the greater effect that the government was hoping that it would back in 2008. Central banks indirectly changed the money supply by changing the monetary base. So what is the monetary base? That includes bank reserves and then currency in circulation. The money supply includes the currency in circulation and then checkable deposits, basically. So the monetary base does not include checkable deposits. Both currency is included into both categories though. So keep that in mind. When we say monetary base, that's the bank reserves plus currency. When we say money supply, we're talking about the currency plus the checkable deposits, basically. So keep that in mind. This is what the bank has in the bank, what they own. And then this is the checkable deposits, basically, that we've deposited that are actually ours. They don't really belong to the bank, even though they're holding it onto us right now. Banks can create money through that fractional reserve banking system. This is where the money multiplier goes into effect. So we should know that 1 divided by the reserve requirement ratio will give us our money multiplier. And then we just multiply that by whatever the amount that the banks are allowed to loan out, basically. So money multiplier goes into effect. Remember that if the banks are getting loans, if the central bank is buying money from the bank, that doesn't make sense, not buying money. When they're buying bonds from the bank, that means that they don't have to actually hold on to a fraction of it. So keep that in mind. I've got some great practice questions for that too. Bank balance sheets, guys, you need to practice them. They're really difficult. They're probably one of the more difficult subjects, right up there with probably comparative advantage in terms of trade. But just because something is difficult doesn't mean we run away from it. We just means we have to practice it more and accept that it is difficult. There's a lot more areas for us to make mistakes and problems and that kind of stuff. I'm teaching my niece right now multiplication. We're just starting with it. She just got comfortable with addition and subtraction. So now to jump her into multiplication, she was a little bit scared. At first, she didn't want to do it, but we're working our way through, basically. And I told her, I was like, you just can't be scared. You just have to keep practicing and, know that the more practice, the better you'll get. So, and I think I just skipped that slide. So let me go back to the bank balance sheets. The practice questions can be confusing. The trick is just to be very careful, practice, and then carefully read the questions. If money is deposited in a bank, remember there's, a trick question. If money is deposited, if cash money is deposited in a bank, know that there's no change in M1. That's a trick question they love to ask. They'll be like, Bob deposited $1,000 into the bank. What's the change in M1? And a lot of you are going to be like 1,000 or lost 1,000 or whatever. But that's not right because actually cash and checkable deposits are included in M1. So basically it's a trick question because they're saying he takes this form of M1 and changes it into a different form of still classified in M1 basically. And then just know that if money is deposited by a bank customer, you need to multiply the multiplier times how much the excess reserves. So if Bob deposits $100 into the bank and the reserve ratio is 10%, that means that the bank has to hold on to $10. They can loan out 90. So I do the money multiplier, which would be 1 divided by 0.1, 1 divided by 10%, which would be 10. And so I would do 10 times 900, and I wouldn't do it times the full, I would do times 90, not times the full $100 because $10 has to be held on to. But if money is paid to the bank for their bonds or assets, then all of that money can be multiplied. So that's the big difference there. If a customer deposits money, some money has to be held on to. But if the central bank buys bonds from the bank, from the commercial bank, then all of that money can be multiplied. Now we're ready to move on. So here's a great bank balance sheet practice, and the answers are right here. I really recommend that you practice as many as you can on these. The more practice you get, the more comfortable you'll feel with them. And I really would not be surprised if there is a bank balance sheet for the 2020 exam. So I know a lot of us are hoping that isn't the case, but as we know, hope is not a strategy. So we will keep practicing and make sure we master it. And please ask me any questions that you have. There's also some great videos that Mr. Clifford has created and other great videos that other teachers have created as well. So I recommend you check those out if that's an area of need. Let's go into the money market now. Money market is basically a graph that we need to know. It's one of our key graphs. What should we know about it? Money supply is vertical. Why? Because it's set by the central bank. It's set by the Federal Reserve, basically. It's a constant. It's not changing because of market forces. It is what it is, basically. Whatever the Fed wants the money supply to be, and they can adjust it as they see fit through those tools of monetary policy. Equilibrium is when quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. If we're in disequilibrium, what happens if there's a disequilibrium? We see surpluses and shortages, and so market forces are going to drive those nominal interest rates, basically. So if all of a sudden lenders are charging too high of rates, too high nominal interest rates, eventually there's going to be a surplus that they are saying, wait, no one wants to borrow from me at that rate, so they're going to have to drive them down. If they're having their rates too low, eventually then so many people will be demanding loans from them, they're going to have to go, hey, I have to raise my rates because 50 people asked me for a loan and I only have enough to give 5 people loans. So let me raise my rates. And again, that's just market demand and supply just going into effect, basically. So changes in the money market, we should know the money demand shifters. That's changes in national income. If our income goes up, we demand more money. If it goes down, we demand less money. Changes in price level. This is one that students often confuse because they think if price level goes up, won't I demand less money because I can't afford as much? But not really. The real thing that happens is that we see that if price level goes up, there's still some necessary purchases you need to make, like gas and food and that kinds of stuff. And so maybe you're going to substitute and have some trade-offs on your other purchases, but likely you still will need more money for your other transactions that you're making on a needed basis. And then also changes in money technology, like when credit cards were invented, for example, that was the technology that then decreased the demand for money because people didn't need as much physical cash, basically. The money supply shifters are any actions of the central bank, basically. Those would be our 3 tools of monetary policy. So if you see an action of the central bank, that's got to be, or Federal Reserve, they're talking about the US specifically, that's going to be a shifter of money supply. Nothing else can shift money supply. Keep that in mind. No other market forces. If the Fed doesn't want to shift money supply, it does not shift, basically. Now, interest rates can change because the money demand can shift. They can't control money demand, but they can control money supply. Okay, monetary policy. The central banks implement and control monetary policy, so we should know who the central banks are. Their basically main job is to manage the financial system, but also to drive monetary policy and make policy decisions that are going to help the economy. The tools of monetary policy, the most often used is the open market operation. That's just the buying and selling of bonds. Also, they could use the required reserve ratio. That's the amount that they tell banks to hang on to. They could say, hey, hang on to more money or hang on to less money, which is going to change the monetary base. And then also the discount rate. They could if they change the discount rate is the rate that the central bank charges commercial banks. So if they raise up that discount rate, it's basically advertising banks, hey, don't borrow from us right now. It's going to cost you too much, and we're looking to decrease that money supply. Remember, buy big, sell small. So buying bonds means bigger money supply. Selling bonds means smaller money supply. So remember that, please. Those are open market operations we need to know. The money multiplier will create a bigger effect for bond purchases and sales. And the reason for that is because, again, they don't have to hang on to any fractions or portions of that, so it's going to have a bigger effect there. And then the federal funds rate, lastly, is just this rate that is not controlled by the Fed. It's a really poorly key term. It's really poorly named key term because most people think, wouldn't the federal funds rate be controlled by the federal government? And it's not. It's the rate that banks charge each other for like overnight loans and stuff like that. So if a bank is short of their required reserve ratio, they could go to the Fed and they could borrow money from them, but they also could call up another bank and say, hey, can I get a loan? I'm a little short on my demand deposits or my making sure that I'm meeting my required reserves. So can you loan me some of your excess reserves so I can meet that? So it's not something they control. And by they, I mean the central bank. It is something, though, that the central bank uses as a tool to be an indicator, because what is happening with the federal funds rate is a big indicator of what's happening in the money supply. So again, federal funds rate is the rate that banks charge each other for overnight loans. So that's the difference between borrowing from your mom or dad, that's borrowing from the Fed or the central bank, versus borrowing from your brother and sister. Monetary policy, again, we need to know that the central banks can influence nominal interest rate by changing the money supply. That's going to affect investment. That's basically them trying to shift AD, and they can't directly do that. But by affecting interest rates, that will affect investment, and that's a indirect component of AD. Expansionary monetary policy is used during recession. Contractionary monetary policy will be used during an inflationary gap. The money market and ASAD can be used to show those effects of the short-run monetary policy actions. Most of the times when you're graphing monetary policy, though, you're going to do it on the money market. Also, they want you to know that lags can happen, of course. It's easier for the Fed to act because you don't need Congress to come up with a law that everybody can agree on. It's 12 people in a room, and they basically just vote and say, okay, let's go ahead and buy bonds or sell bonds. But it does take time for the economy to adjust. So it's not an instant, just like turning on the light switch kind of effect. Okay, I got a great practice question for you here on money market FRQ practice. You'll get to graph out the money market and answer some questions. Keep in mind, it's also going to ask you about bond prices. Let's remember that bond prices and interest rates are inversely related. Inversely related. That's from a previous unit that we found that out. So here's the answer key for that one. Last thing that we cover in Unit 4 is the loanable funds market, which is another graph. It's very similar to the money market, but there's a few key differences. So loanable funds market is not just the market for money, or it's the market for loanable funds, basically, quantity of loans in the market versus the real interest rate. So it's the behavior of savers and borrowers. For demand, it's an inverse relationship. It's downward sloping. And for supply, it's a positive relationship. It's upward sloping, basically, and that's lenders and savers. It shows us real interest rates. That's a different from the money market, which is showing us nominal interest rate. Another key difference is that the supply of loanable funds is upward sloping. It's not a vertical line because it's not set by the central bank. It's set by the lenders. In a closed economy, it's the sum of public and private savings. And in an open economy, it's national savings and the net capital inflow. That open economy stuff will not appear for the 2020 exam, so don't worry about that. The loanable funds market, we should know that equilibrium is when quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Disequilibrium is basically when we have surpluses and shortages that basically then the market forces come in to drive those real interest rates. So if lenders are charging too high of rates, they're going to have a surplus of loan, have to drive down their rates. If their rates are too low, then eventually they're going to have a shortage of loans that they can offer. So many people are going to be demanding loans at such low rates that they're going to have to raise their rates. So again, those market forces will drive us back to equilibrium. That's that invisible hand. Loanable funds can show the effects of government spending, taxes, and borrowing. Can also show us the effect of crowding out, which we'll cover in our next unit. But crowding out, you would use the loanable funds graph to show that. Factors that shift demand are any kind of change in borrowing behavior. Factors that shift supply, any kind of change in savings behavior. It's just as simple as that, honestly. They're going to say savers did this or borrowers did this. You're going to read the question and go, oh, they need more loans. They're demanding more loans. That means, or they're borrowing more. That means that demand then has increased, basically. Okay, got a great question for you on the loanable funds market. You'll get to graph that out, practice that out, and see how you do with that one. And as always, I've got the answer key right next to it. Okay, that is it for Unit 4. We are almost done. We got one more unit to go. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you so much for watching these videos. As always, I think you can subscribe here and then watch this video. I don't know how this works. I'm still learning the YouTube. All right, guys. I love you all. Have a great day and stick around. We got one more unit to go. That's Unit 5. Have a good day, Vikings.